Hello, everyone, and welcome to this explainer. So, have you ever noticed just how absolutely exhausting it is to constantly try to be happy? I mean, we live in a culture that is literally obsessed with unrealistically positive expectations. You know the drill. Be happier, be healthier, be the absolute best, have the perfect job, the perfect family, and somehow remain perfectly zen while juggling it all. Honestly, it's exhausting. Well, today, we are going to cut right through all that cultural BS of toxic positivity. We're going to look at a radically different, highly counterintuitive paradigm shift that might just completely change how you view your entire life. Okay, let's dive into this. Don't try. Yep, you heard that right. This was the actual epitaph written on the tombstone of Charles Bukowski. Now, Bukowski was, by pretty much all conventional standards, a total mess for most of his life. He was an alcoholic, a chronic gambler, a cheapskate, and someone who spent literally decades being rejected by every single publisher he sent his writing to. So you definitely wouldn't expect to find life advice from him, right? But when he finally found success later in life, his secret wasn't some sudden burst of relentless, positive determination. Nope. His genius was his unflinching comfort with being a total failure. He didn't try to be anything other than exactly what he was. And honestly, that brings us perfectly to the source material for today's explainer. So, Mark Manson's wildly successful book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, is deliberately provocative. But to really grasp it, I need you to do something very specific for me. Try to look at it in a non-literal sense. Because if you take the title completely literally, you might think it's a guide to becoming this emotionless psychopathic rock who just doesn't care about anyone or anything. But that is absolutely not the goal here. When we look at it non-literally, we see the book is actually about intentional value curation. It's about figuring out what is truly, deeply important to you, and then aggressively letting go of all the rest. Let's move right into Section 1, the feedback loop from hell. First, we have to address this modern epidemic of anxiety we're all dealing with. You see, our consumer culture literally profits from making us feel inadequate. If you constantly feel like you're missing out, well, you're going to buy more, consume more, and blindly strive for more. And it completely traps our brains in what Manson brilliantly calls the feedback loop from hell. Think about it. Step 1, you feel anxious about confronting somebody. Step 2, that anxiety cripples you, and suddenly you start wondering why you're so anxious in the first place. So now you're anxious about being anxious. Step 3, you realize this whole thing is making you miserable, and you start hating yourself for being so anxious all the time. It's a completely paralyzing cycle. Because we are constantly bombarded with social media images of everyone else having this seemingly perfect time, we feel bad about feeling bad. We feel guilty for feeling guilty. We just judge our own negative emotions until we are completely, helplessly trapped. So how in the world do we break this loop? Well, it goes back to understanding the title's true underlying meaning. Again, we have to look past the literal phrasing. The literal interpretation implies being completely indifferent to everything, but there's absolutely nothing admirable about indifference. Usually, indifferent people are just terrified of the world. The non-literal, true meaning, it's being comfortable being different. It means not caring about adversity when you're passionately pursuing your goals. It means being totally willing to be an outcast or to piss some people off because you're doing what you genuinely feel is right and noble. Basically, you say forget it to everything unimportant in life, just so you can fiercely reserve your energy for what truly matters. Okay, moving on to Section 2, the backwards law. The philosopher Alan Watts introduced a paradox that turns our constant, exhausting pursuit of happiness completely upside down. He said, the desire for more positive experience is itself a negative experience. Accepting negative experience is a positive experience. Take a second to really unpretzel your brain and digest that. It's a massive mind bender, right? But when you look past the literal phrasing and view it in a non-literal sense, it is profoundly true. Pursuing the positive actually just highlights exactly what you lack. Let's break down exactly how this backwards law plays out in real, everyday life. The more desperately you want to be rich, the more poor and unworthy you actually feel, regardless of how much money you're actually making. The more you crave being sexy and beautiful, the uglier you come to see yourself when you look in the mirror. Even chasing spiritual enlightenment, doing that can make you incredibly self-centered and shallow, all because you are entirely focused on your own perceived lack of peace. Obsessing over what we lack inherently reinforces the reality that we lack it. So if pursuing the positive is a negative, then pursuing the negative generates the positive. The pain you voluntarily pursue in the gym, that creates health. The agonizing failures you endure in business, those eventually create success. Let's jump to Section 3. Happiness is a problem. Now, to dismantle a fantasy we all hold on to, Manson introduces a metaphorical superhero in his book. He calls him Disappointment Panda. His superpower? Showing up and telling people the harsh truths they desperately need to hear but absolutely don't want to accept. And the biggest harsh truth of all? Problems never stop. Ever. They just get exchanged or upgraded. Therefore, the most important question to ask yourself isn't, what do you want out of life? Because everyone wants to be happy, have great sex, make money, and be respected. That is the easy answer. The real question is, what pain do you want in your life? What are you actually willing to struggle for? If you want the corner office, are you actually willing to suffer through 60-hour work weeks and toxic corporate politics? Joy doesn't just spontaneously sprout out of the ground. Happiness comes from solving problems. True happiness occurs only when you find the problems you actually enjoy having and enjoy solving. So how exactly do you choose the right problems? Well, by choosing the right values. Shitty values are usually based on external circumstances that are completely outside of your control. Things like chasing constant pleasure, judging your worth by material success, or feeling the need to always be right. These things might give you a quick high, but they will leave you entirely empty. Good values, on the other hand, are internal. They're process-oriented and totally within your control. Things like honesty, vulnerability, or standing up for something you believe in. True happiness isn't avoiding problems. No way. It's solving good problems based on these good internal metrics. Which brings us to Section 4, responsibility is not fault. Taking control of these values requires stepping up. But we live in this era of victimhood chic, where blaming others gives us a quick, self-righteous high, but ultimately leaves us completely powerless to change our own lives. A lot of people hesitate to step up because they confuse responsibility with fault. But here's the difference. Fault is past tense. It results from choices that have already been made. Responsibility is present tense. It results from the choices you are making right now. Think of it like this. If someone rear-ends your car, it is 100% their fault. But it is your responsibility to figure out how you're going to react, how you deal with your insurance, and how you manage your emotions in that present moment. You can't control what happens to you, but you can always control how you interpret it and how you respond. And this brings us to a harsh but ultimately empowering truth. You are always choosing. Always. Even if you decide to completely ignore a problem, guess what? That is still a choice. You are entirely responsible for the metrics by which you measure your life. Nobody else can step in and care for you. Once you realize that you and only you are responsible for your internal metrics, you finally release the tension of feeling unfairly burdened by life's inevitable tragedies. And finally, Section 5, the ultimate compass. Death. We are navigating away from those external metrics, like money, likes, and status, to the most profound internal metric we possess. Here it is. You and everyone you know are going to be dead soon. I know, that sounds incredibly dark, but I really want you to hear it with warmth and empathy. This isn't a threat. It is a deeply liberating truth. In the short amount of time between right now and the end of your life, you only have a limited amount of energy. You literally only have a limited amount of cares to give. If you go around caring about every rude cashier or every canceled TV show, you are going to waste your life. Death is the light by which the shadow of all of life's meaning is actually measured. The anthropologist Ernest Becker argued that because death scares us so much, we create what he calls immortality projects, these conceptual versions of ourselves that we desperately hope will live on forever. As he put it, our immortality projects are our values, driven by fear to give way too many fucks to distract us from our own death. When we avoid thinking about death, we let trivial, totally superficial values hijack our brains. But keeping our mortality in mind actively shrinks our trivial anxieties to zero. It clears out the noise. It forces us to ask what we were actually doing with the limited time we have left. Which leaves us with this final, truly provocative thought. They say a butterfly flapping its wings in Africa can cause a hurricane in Florida, right? So ask yourself right now, what hurricanes will you leave in your wake? When you are gone, what mark will you have made? I challenge you to stop chasing a literal, perfect, problem-free existence. It just doesn't exist. Instead, try to look at your life in a non-literal sense. Embrace the backwards law. Take complete responsibility for your own values. Because when you finally start caring about only the things that truly, deeply matter, you become absolutely unstoppable. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, stay curious and choose your struggles wisely.